Good evening. We are in 2 Kings. I believe we're right around chapter 17 or 16. Ahaz. I think that's right around where we left off. Am I right? Anybody remember from last week? Yeah, you weren't here last week. I think I remember getting right around to Ahaz, so let's pick it up there. Okay. Yes, I remember we went to King Azariah, or in parentheses, Uzziah in 15, and that brought us to 16, and we started getting into Ahaz. Now, we've had a couple of righteous kings in Judah for a couple generations. And Judah has been blessed because of it, and has become stronger than Israel, and in almost every way. And then Ahaz becomes king over Judah, and Ahaz just goes crazy. His father, first we have Jotham, and Jotham started the decline from Uzziah, but all in all, he wasn't as bad. He didn't do anything drastic. He followed the Torah. It says, verse 34, and he did what was right in the sight of the Lord, according to all that his father Uzziah had done. Right? But he didn't remove the high places. But all in all, Jotham was okay. It's fine. And then his son Ahaz takes over, and Ahaz just goes crazy with idolatry and with Baal worship and all of that witchcraft, and floods the place with it, floods the temple with it. And there's this line that you get all the time, just so you know what it is. Under every green tree and every high mountain, right? Or every high mountain, under every spreading tree. What that means is just their way of saying everywhere. It's just it's a figure of speech, meaning he filled the land with idols and witchcraft. You understand? Okay. So Ahaz goes this now. So we had a succession of righteous kings in Judah who, after Amaziah, was killed by Jehu when he killed both king of Israel and king of Judah. Remember that? And then Athaliah takes over, and then we had King Joash, who remained faithful to the Lord for all the days of Jehoiada. Went a little crazy right at the end. He did go crazy at the end. But then, for a couple generations, we had kings that were largely righteous and Torah observant, I can use that term, in Judah. And Judah was being blessed because of it. And then King Ahaz just goes completely the opposite direction. Chapter 16. In the 17th year of Pekah, the son of Remaliah. Now remember, we're carrying two timelines. So it goes with Israel for a while, then it backs up and goes back to Judah for a while, and then it goes back to Israel. So two timelines going consecutively. Ahaz, the son of Jotham, king of Judah, became king. Ahaz was 20 years old when he became king, and he reigned 16 years in Jerusalem, and he did not do what was right in the sight of the Lord his God, as his father David had done. But he walked in the ways of the kings of Israel, and even made his son pass through the fire. I want you to underline it, because there's this absolute total progression with it. Always eventually goes to human sacrifice and child sacrifice, and then the Lord has to intervene. And it happens here, and then of course Manasseh. Hezekiah tries to turn things around, but then Manasseh, his son. And now one thing you have to understand, now I've mentioned this to you before, and I've shown you that human sacrifice, every single culture, it's something that's quite interesting. Every single culture on the planet before the advent of Judeo-Christianity was spread through the world had some form of human sacrifice. Do you know that? Would there be a tribe here and there that didn't? Yeah, but by and large, every ethnicity had their version of human sacrifice. Okay? And then eventually, child sacrifice. And there seems to definitely be the hand of God, a progression towards when humanity comes to this point, he intervenes with some kind of usually trying to purge that away. All right? But isn't it interesting that that follows every ethnicity, every pagan religion, and every form of witchcraft through all over the world? It eventually went there. Okay? So that is something, though, that you see is very common. Of course, I'm Irish. So it wasn't for St. Patrick, we'd still be hanging people from hooks and castles, because that's what the Druids did. Okay? Until an English man came and preached the gospel and took on the Druids and took over the country and freed them from the yoke of slavery to witchcraft and evil. Right? But the point is that you see it everywhere. So I just point that out to you because there's a sharp contrast here. Once they get to this point, it's only a matter of time before the Lord intervenes. Does everybody see that? Mm-hmm. Now, we're very heavily loaded with people on the right side tonight, so I know, Casey, that we have all the people over here, so it's like, if I'm looking a little bit more to the right.
That's okay.
Okay.
Don't make eye contact.
So, you see that happen. So King Ahaz goes the exact opposite direction, and he even goes farther than the kings of Israel. Now it says, follow the ways of kings of Israel, because they did not tear down the sins and the calf idols of Jeroboam. Of course, so they were in rebellion against God. But he goes farther against them, plunging himself into witchcraft and wickedness. Okay? So, now one thing that the Lord is very consistent on, and I love this, and it's interesting to think about. The Lord doesn't separate between different kinds of paganism and witchcraft. Because you think some of them are worse. I mean, he's gone a little worse. He's actually sacrificing his child in the fire, and even though in many of those Baal worship, Ashtaroth, the gods of the Sepharvites and Molech, all had their form of human sacrifice. And they all had forms of sick sexual practices, hate to say it, but they all did have some kind of version of that. All right? So, but what's interesting is the Lord doesn't really differentiate between which one you do. Because you either serve Him or any kind of paganism, witchcraft, or idolatry is all the same wickedness and the same evil in God's sight. Right? Mm-hmm. But Ahaz just plunges himself so hard into it that he is in Judah, in Jerusalem, sacrificing his children. Now Manasseh goes even farther. Imagine that Manasseh goes even farther than Ahaz. Is unbelievable, but it happens. Okay? So, verse 4, and he sacrificed and burned incense on the high places and on the hills and under every green tree. And Rezin, king of Aram, came, and Pekah, son of Remaliah, king of Israel, came up to Jerusalem to wage war, and they besieged Ahaz, but could not overcome him. And at that time, Rezin, king of Aram, recovered Elath from Aram and cleared the Judeans out of the Elath entirely. And the Arameans came to Elath and have lived there to this day, so he lost a bunch of land. Verse 7, so Ahaz sent messengers to Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, saying, I am your servant and your son. Come up and deliver me from the hand of the king of Aram and from the hand of the king of Israel, who are rising up against me. And Ahaz took silver and gold and all that he found in the treasuries of the Lord and in the house of the Lord, and gave it to him. Verse 9, so the king of Assyria listened to him, and the king of Assyria went up against Damascus and captured it and carried the people away into exile to Kir and to Rezin to death. All right? Verse 10, now King Ahaz went to Damascus to meet Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, and saw the altar. Now this story is just unbelievable. He's the king of Judah. All the histories and things that he has experienced and seen and heard. And now he goes to Damascus and he sees this altar, okay? And the reason why this is all here is because it's showing you how wicked he was. All right? And how distasteful, how horrible this was to the Lord. So, but he wanted to set up this same wicked altar in the temple. And he burned his burnt offering and his meal offering, and poured out his libation, which is a drink offering, and sprinkled the blood of his peace offerings on the altar. And the bronze altar which was before the Lord he brought from the front of the house, from between his altar and the house of the Lord, and he put it on the north side of the altar. The king Ahaz commanded Urijah the priest, saying, upon the great altar burn the morning burnt offering and evening. So what is this all about? What he's doing, okay, is he's taking all of that and he's using the altar for Judah, that the priests, the sons of Aaron, do the sacrifices for the people and before the Lord. Use that for his pagan wickedness. You understand? Totally disregard that and start sacrificing, using the altar to sacrifice to idols. It's pretty horrible. Verse 17, the king has cut off the borders of the stands and removed the laver from them, and he also took down the seat from the bronze oxen which were under it, and he put it on a pavement of stone, and he covered way for the Sabbath which they had built in the house, and the outer entry of the king, he removed from the house of the Lord because of the king of Assyria. So what that whole story is telling you is that he took every single thing that had any kind of value, right, on everything, and then he even wanted to use the altar was for the Lord for worshiping his false idols of these other countries that he saw in Damascus. Do you see that? Okay, so those details are put in there for you just to see how wicked he was, right? Now you notice Israel had peace and Judah had some things going well for them, and started to turn around and become blessed and get stronger, while they had some righteous kings, and now it's King Ahaz has plunged them right back into peril. Verse 9, now we get more detail about Ahaz when we go through Chronicles. 19, now the rest of the acts of Ahaz which he did, are they not written in the books of the Chronicles, kings of Judah? So Ahaz slept with his fathers and was buried with his fathers in the city of David, and his son Hezekiah reigned in his place. In the 12th year of Ahaz, king of Judah, Hoshea, the son of Elah, became king over Israel in Samaria and reigned 9 years. Now, we're going back. Now, there's two timelines. Okay? So now let me give you an overall story of what happens here. The time stamp for the exile of Israel is 722 BC. Okay? Now, Israel has been in defiance of God since Jeroboam, since they first were established as the northern kingdom. And Jeroboam set up the cow idols and said, "This is Yahweh who brought you out of Egypt," and mixed the covenant with his made-up idolatry, so they wouldn't go back to Jerusalem, right? And all the kings of Israel continued on in it, and more, and even Jehu then was sent by God, anointed by God to be king, and took out Ahab and Jezebel and fulfilled the word of the Lord, and yet did all of that, destroyed all the Baal worship and yet he didn't tear down the sin of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, but continued in them. So that his family was in rebellion against the Lord, and it's gone all the way down and no turning. All right? And of course, we know that the Lord had been... Now, we went through Leviticus, we went through Deuteronomy, you saw the covenant, the blessings, and the curses. Did Moses mention anything about them being persecuted and exiled into foreign land? Did that come up? Do you remember how I pointed out to you that he laid out their entire history? All right, so 722 BC. Still, the best history we have on this time period, which you hear about a lot, about the Assyrian Empire, and even Tiglath-Pileser being a famous historical figure. Okay? The best information still comes from the Bible. And the truth is that Assyria really started something kind of new when it comes to... they were the first dominating world power. All right, now, you guys went through Daniel already last year. So you know, remember the statue? Dad brought you through the statue and has the kingdoms. Remember, right?
Yep.
Okay, well, see, Assyria has started something that went on and progressed from there on out, which was a world power. Meaning, now not the entire world, but that whole known world of the time, right? And, but see, Assyria didn't just kill everybody. Their idea started in unity and bringing people together, but in order to do that, they had to remove you from your land and make you assimilate into their culture. Therefore, you wouldn't be loyal to your land or culture anymore. You would become an Assyrian and part of the empire. So they started this practice of moving people from different places. All right? Taking you to a foreign land and establishing you there under the empire, and then bringing other people to it. So no one is in their original land. That whole plan behind it, and it worked, okay, was to eventually not just kill you because we're valuable. The more people that the kingdom has, the more powerful they are, right? So the point is that they move you to a different place, therefore nullifying your sovereignty, nullifying your loyalty to your land and to your people, right? And Assyria started doing that, and of course Assyria dominated everywhere. Assyria wiped out nations and ethnicities and things that were there for thousands of, well, at least 1,000 years, okay, or more. Annihilated them. Why? By all this practice and destroying any army that stood in their way and then moving them, therefore producing the Assyrian Empire. Right? Now, why I'm saying that now is because that you're going to see that progression continue on with the next one. Babylon does that, and then you have Alexander. Then you have the Media-Persians do it, and then you have Alexander do it, Macedonia, right on down to Rome. Follow that pattern, okay? So, but what Assyria did, so when they get to Israel, they have already wiped out whole nations and moved them to different places. And so they come to Israel, and you get here, the writer of 2 Kings, he explains to you what happens. All right? So only just read that little part, because it's really good. 17 verse 7. Now it came about because the sons of Israel had sinned against the Lord their God, who had brought them up from the land of Egypt, from under the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and they had feared other gods and walked in the customs of the nations whom the Lord had driven out before the sons of Israel, and in the customs of the kings of Israel, which they had introduced, which means the calf idols, right? And the sons of Israel did things secretly that were not right against the Lord their God. Moreover, they built for themselves high places in all their towns, from watchtower to fortified city, and they set for themselves sacred pillars and Asherim on every high hill and under every green tree, and there they burned incense in all the high places and nations which the Lord had carried away into exile before them. And they did evil things, provoking the Lord. And they served idols, concerning which the Lord had said to them, "You shall not do this thing." Yet the Lord warned Israel and Judah through all of his prophets. That's why I got to read this part, because it's powerful. And every seer, saying, "Turn from your evil ways and keep your commandments, my statutes, according to the law which I commanded your fathers, which I sent to you through my servants the prophets." However, they did not listen, but stiffened their neck like their fathers, who did not believe in the Lord their God. And they rejected his statutes and his covenant which he had made with their fathers, and his warnings with which he had warned them, as they followed vanity and became vain, and went after the nations which surrounded them, concerning which the Lord commanded them not to be like them. And they forsook all the commandments of the Lord their God, and made for themselves molten images, even 2 calves, and made an Asherah, and worshipped all the host of heaven, and served Baal. And they made their sons and daughters pass through the fire, and practiced divination and enchantments, and sold themselves to do evil in the sight of the Lord, provoking him. So the Lord was very angry with Israel, and he removed them from his sight. None was left except the tribe of Judah. And Judah did not keep the commandments of the Lord their God, but walked in the customs which Israel had introduced. So, that is the situation right now. So, Assyria comes and exiles Israel. Now, what's interesting from the biblical perspective, which is the only perspective, who raised up Assyria?
The Lord.
God. Why? To fulfill his word. To fulfill his punishment of Israel. Right? And so Israel is exiled. Now, what's interesting here, there's a whole background to this part, okay, that you may not know. But there's a history, a New Testament correlation that many people aren't aware of that happens here. Okay, so the king of Syria's custom, right? The Assyrian Empire continue on and gain strength like no other empire because of this loyalty to the empire and moving you out of your land. So they would take you, they exile Israel. They didn't go in there just to destroy Israel and wipe them out. They defeated their army and produced them to surrender, and once they surrendered, they actually offered them to live. But we're going to take you to a foreign place, way outside of the land of Israel, and settle you there, and you become a part of the empire. Right? So, and then they take the people from other lands that they have already destroyed their army, and they surrendered, and they move them, all a mixed bag of different people.
Call them Samaritans.
Right? Well, there you go. You got it. Right? And move them to the land of Canaan. Well, it used to be Canaan, which is now Israel. Okay? So, move them there. And let me explain something to you. This story is a little interesting. Because all of a sudden you're like, and it explains to you what the king of Assyria did. And there's all these foreign people now in the northern kingdom, north of Judah. And lions, and they were having all these problems with the animals turning and killing a bunch of them. So they got in their mind that the Lord, the God of the land, is angry with them, and they need to learn his customs. So they sent for a priest from Israel to go back and teach them. Okay? And teach the people how to appease the God of the land. So he goes back. And they have a priest there, and he starts to teach them. And what does he teach from? He teaches from the law of Moses. Okay? And explains to them who the God of Israel is, and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so what happens is they mix it together. They take it in. You have all these people from all these foreign lands and all these different mixed bag pagan religions. And but yet they have to appease this God, the God of Israel, or things are going to go bad for them. So what do? They throw him there and they sacrifice him to make him happy, but yet they still do all their paganism and all their idolatry and all their wickedness. Right? Thus producing a people group in the Bible. Now, a confusing people group in the New Testament, because a lot of people don't understand the difference. We've all read through the Gospels, you've heard the term Samaritan. Right? Now, remember, what was the capital of the northern kingdom of Israel? Samaria. Right? Samaria. So the Jews are the ones that started to call them Jews, coming from from the kingdom of Judah, not necessarily from the tribe of Judah, called them Samaritans. Okay? Now, what's interesting about them is that they are not completely Gentile. They are a mixed breed. They are a mixed race. I hate the term race, you know that, but I'm stuck with it at this point. I could say mixed ethnicity. And I'll explain that to you is, do you remember the woman at the well? Jesus is the woman at the well, right? The Samaritan woman.
Yeah.
Do you remember them talking about her father Jacob?
Yeah.
Right? And how our father Jacob worshipped on this mountain. Right? But you Jews say the place we must worship is in Jerusalem. Of course, because that's what the law of Moses all had to come to. Jerusalem, the place where the Lord chooses to put his name forever. Right?
Yeah.
So, now, but how could you say her father Jacob? Now, what happened is there was still a remnant of they always left the poor of the land and the least of the people, they always left a remnant of them in the land to take care of it, because it doesn't take very long for all the vineyards and all the fields and all the farms to just totally fall apart and be overgrown, and they would have to start from scratch.
There's no locals. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it'd get overrun with the critters and everything else. We know how that goes. So they always would leave. They would find a couple men in the town who were not of any kind of standing position, were not highly educated or anything, and they would give them, you take care of all this stuff for the king. And when we come back, you can live here, take care of it, and when we come back and we can eat of the fruit and have everything set. All right? You're going to see that what happens with Judah later too. So anyway, so there still was a small remnant of the children of Israel there. You understand?
Yeah.
Then all these mixed people groups come in. And over the course of time, what happens is you have a mixed group of children of Israel mixed with the Gentile nations, producing this ethnicity called Samaritan. It was not necessarily just means you were descendants of the, they were a mixed group. It all came from this story. Now, Jesus did something quite astounding to back up my point here. Now, do you remember when the Syrian woman came to Jesus and said to him, about her daughter, and Jesus said, it would not be right to take the children's bread and toss it to their dogs. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Jesus didn't say that. Yes, he did. Okay? And she said, but Master, even the dogs get to eat the crumbs that fall. I mean, even the dogs get to eat the crumbs that fall from the Master's table. And the Lord was so blessed by her statement of accepting that the Gentiles are dogs because they don't know the Lord and they don't, right? But yet, he is there, and she believes, and she wants to even get the scraps. And then the Lord is blessed and says, it's granted. And of course she goes back and her daughter's already healed. The Lord said the word and bam. Right? But that story tells us something, because then the Lord did not give any Gentiles the time of day. He sent his disciples to. He came for the lost sheep of Israel. Right? There was only one other people group that actually got a face-to-face with Jesus. Guess who they were? The Samaritans. The Lord spent 2 days in Samaria teaching them. 2 days. Remember that? After the woman, this is in the book, this is in John. After the woman at the well, and he said to her, you were right, we were not your husband. In fact, you've had 5 husbands, and the man you're now with is not your husband. What you said is very true, and then she freaks out. Says, oh my God, I see that you're a prophet, right? And but you Jews say, like I just said, our father Jacob worshipped on this mountain, but you worship in Jerusalem, and we must worship in Jerusalem. And then Jesus' line is, you worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews, or salvation is from Judah. Meaning what? The Davidic kingdom, the law of Moses, and the temple worship. Do you understand? All right. So Jesus was declaring that wrong, and that salvation is from the God of Israel, that from Yahweh's word, and Jerusalem is the place, and the temple is the house of God, right? So, which of course, why I'm saying those things, you may not get that, but there's people that try to twist all of that there. That's why those are very definitive statements that you get from this story, all right? And of course, a lot of people just hate the fact that Jesus said salvation is from the Jews. Meaning, all that religion and all, well, actually, yeah. All right? So, but at that story, she then is so blown away, and the disciples come back and they see him talking to a woman, not just a woman, a Samaritan woman, and they don't know what to say. They don't even know what to say to them. They're all kind of just like whispering, and they don't know how to handle this. Because her opening statement to Jesus was, Jews don't associate with Samaritans. Right? And so she goes and tells the village. And of course, they all want to come see him. But what the Lord does is interesting. He actually gives them a witness. He spends 2 days with them and preaches to them that salvation is from the Jews, from the law of Moses, and the good news of the kingdom of Messiah breaking forth into the world. Right? They get a witness. And of course, then in the book of Acts, where does things break out first among the Gentiles? The Samaritans. And Peter and John got to go up and lay hands on them. Remember, right? But they were quicker with the Samaritans than when it was Cornelius, then they had to freak out. Why? Because now I know I'm throwing a lot of the Gospels in the book of Acts in here, but there's a direct correlation. That whole thing comes in the New Testament and expects you to know this. It all comes from here.
There was already a Jewish bloodline mixed.
There was Jewish blood there. There was a representation of the children of Israel there, and the covenant of Jacob had some part of it. Therefore, the Lord gave them a witness. Different than the rest of the Samaritans were separate. Even when you read the Gospels and you read through the book of Acts, there was the Gentiles, then there was the Samaritans. They weren't thrown, all of us were thrown in this same bag. The Samaritans were not Jews, but they were not thrown in the same bag. They were mixed. Because they had some understanding of the God of Israel. You understand? And the Lord gave them a witness. Okay, and of course they had the Samaritan Pentateuch, and there's a lot of things that happened there. Okay, and actually, the first overall full given translation, rabbinical translation of the Bible was in the Greek Septuagint. But there was earlier translations of parts of the Tanakh and parts of the Torah actually done in the language of the Samaritans, which was Aramaic. All right? So anyway, that's interesting, isn't it? So you read through the Gospels and you read through all that, you have this group in there called Samaritans. But you really have no clue who they are or what they are, but yet they're all over the place. And why are they mixed in? Because you see, Galilee, where Jesus is up north of Israel. And Jerusalem's in the middle. Well, actually, why do they keep going through all these Samaritan places? Actually, because they're walking right through them, because on the way down, traveling from Galilee down through Jericho to the Dead Sea down to Jerusalem, you go through all the Samaritan areas. Okay? That's why there was they would travel through the area of the Samaritans. Does everybody get that? Okay. So the Lord still gave them a witness, and they still had a tiny little shred of light. A shred, but a shred nonetheless. Okay? So anyway, that was the backstory there. And of course, the writer was explaining to us, and I love how he says, even though the Lord had sent prophets and seers to warn them and teach them, to turn them back and to call them back over and over and over and again, they would not listen. They only got worse. So the Lord eventually had to bring the fullness of his word upon them. Now, did he already tell them that this would happen if they reject his covenant and worship other gods and plunge into idolatry? Didn't he warn them about that?
Yeah.
How many times? Was it once? Was it twice? Was it more like 30 to 50 times? Yes.
He told Moses they were going to stay.
And of course he told them that that's exactly what they were going to do, him and Joshua, and he gave them a song to teach their children. Right?
Yeah.
So, but what's interesting to me always is this. Not that they were exiled, that the grace of God gave them so much time. That he continually over and over and over again called them back, even though he had the authority to do this the very first generation, based on what they did. So the grace of God was extended for hundreds of years to give them another chance and another chance and another chance and another chance. right? But eventually it came to a point where that was it, and the Lord raised up Assyria to do it. Now, the Assyrians now have destroyed everybody. They're wiping everybody out. No one can stand against Assyria. Right? So they exile Israel, they deal with Israel, and as they keep coming down because they're continually moving, who's next? Judah. And they start to go through the land of Judah, all the towns, and just wiping them out. And of course, more and more they know the Assyrians are coming, so they keep running and running and running. So what you have is in Jerusalem, because it's a walled, powerful city where the king is, more and more of them taking their people in that are running and fleeing from Assyria coming. You understand? So in the walled city of Jerusalem, you have tons of extra people that have come and left their towns and villages in Judah to come and be in Jerusalem with the king because Assyria is coming. That's what's happening right now. So that brings us to Hezekiah. Now we're back on Judah's timeline. Israel is over. All right? There was remnants of Israel scattered all over. From now on, we have Judah. Now, like I explained to you before, one thing that we miss that you don't get as much in Kings, but when we get through Chronicles, what you're going to do, you're going to see it. Now, I'm going to point it out to you, because we're not going to spend a lot of time in the stories, because it's a lot of repeat. But I'm going to point this out to you over and over and over again, that Ezra the priest continually points out the defections from Israel to Judah. And there was many different times where there was a lot of them. First happened when Jeroboam sets up the fake priesthood. The Levites defected, and he set up a border to stop them from going over. And of course, Rehoboam took them in and put them back in. Okay? And then we had with King Asa, who was a righteous king in Judah. Many of the God-fearing people who wanted to serve the Lord started coming back to Judah. And you see again, the kings of Israel try to ward it off, but Asa takes them in. Then it happens with Jehoshaphat. Okay? Then it really, here though, in Chronicles, they really make the point that after Assyria comes and exiles Israel, many thousands or more went and together and banded to go and flee to Judah to see if Hezekiah would take them. And he did. He did take them. He took in remnants that are fleeing from all the tribes of Israel. A big influx of them come at this time. All right? So why is that so important? Because in Judah we have a remnant of all the tribes. And that's an important thing. Now, it may not be important to you, but theologically there's a lot of people that try to detract or destroy that. And that simple fact blows it apart. Okay? And they sound like they love Israel, and they talk about it, and they may even wear prayer shawls and all of that, and they talk about Israel. They might even have churches that have a Jewish flavor and all this, even though they're Gentiles, but a lot of them have this theology that they are actually part of Israel because of the lost tribes of Israel, they call it. It's also called the Ephraimite thing, because Ephraim was a word for the northern kingdom of Israel. All right? Because that was the original inheritance of Ephraim. Or also, what's the other one? I forget. There's another name for it. And it sounds like they talk about Israel, they love Israel, but the truth is their theology nullifies Israel. It's actually completely anti-Semitic and heretical. But it sounds good.
So their theology teaches that all the Jews were wiped out, the original Jews?
No, that they were scattered all over, and so in all of us there's Jewish blood.
I see.
So we're all Israel.
Right.
What that does is it nullifies the natural descendants of Jacob, nullifies the promises of the land.
Replacement theology.
It is the epitome of replacement theology with a nice, menorah sitting on top of it.
Right.
Okay? And it looks like it, sounds like it, but it's not. And I had to come across this. I never heard of such a thing. My dad had mentioned it to me, but I didn't get it until I got hit with it face to face by somebody once. And then I realized, oh my gosh, and then I looked into it, and wow, there's a bunch, it's a pretty big thing. Okay? And but by saying that we're all Jews, that says there is no Jews, except for priest Ezra, who wrote Chronicles, is very, very clear the whole time that in Judah all the tribes are represented. There's a remnant of all the tribes. Okay? Now why that's important, because it's also based on the fact that Judah was predominantly Judah. And, right? But all the other tribes, no, the remnant stayed, and in the exile in Judah, where we get the term Jew from, Jew then became something for all children of Israel, not just descendants of the tribe of Judah, because they were exiles from the kingdom of Judah, therefore they were Jews. Everybody get that? All right? That's where I went from tribe to nation. So, at that point, there was a remnant of all the tribes represented in the exile, and then when they come back after the exile, the Babylonian exile, when they return under Zerubbabel, you see and point out a remnant of all the tribes represented. Meaning, in the reestablishment and the post-exilic time in the Second Temple period represented all Israel. Even though it was a remnant of all the children of Israel, because many were scattered among the nations and were melded in and assimilated into Assyrian culture. You understand? Does everybody get what I just said?
Yeah, so
That was a mouthful, but did you process it?
So when they were in exile, were there still some that were pure Jews?
There were still some, but the point is
That's
that
not the point.
But the people group, see, they'll try to make the point that they melded into the nations, therefore, we're all Jews. And we all can claim the promises, and we all can claim the promise to the land, and blah, blah, blah. Except for the fact that there still was the real, as Isaiah prophesied, you're going through Isaiah, over and over again, the remnant of Judah will continue, and the Lord will continue, but the band of survivors, but only a remnant will survive and maintain and go on. That was written in the 700s. Isaiah is the Isaiah of Hezekiah that we're getting into right now. All right? I say that now because we go through Chronicles, it's very important. But in this story specifically in Chronicles, he really lays that, in 2 Chronicles, he really lays it out, how many came in and Hezekiah took them in. So in Judah, there was a remnant of all the 12 tribes represented. It seems like a minute little thing, but because it's under attack, I want you to be aware of it. I want you to see that. It's important because Jesus proclaimed salvation is from the Jews. Meaning, and that's why that story matters too. Why? Because Jesus did not say to the Samaritan, who actually has some of the blood of Jacob in her, that we're all Jews now. You are too. Did he say that? No, he didn't. Okay? And he said that, that the Jews worship what they know. Okay? So, the point is, and of course, Paul in the book of Romans, speaking of Israel and the Gentile nations, be jealous towards the root, and the root supports you, and they can be grafted into their cultivated olive branch and all that, is very much talking about the natural remnant of Israel and how they're partial blind. I'm not be aware of this mysteries, brothers, but a partial hardening has come over Israel, right? And the gospel has gone to the Gentile nations because of it. But their time will come where the deliverer, the name's quoting Zechariah, the deliverer will come from Zion, Jacob, right? And they will look on him who they pierced. This is from Zechariah. And thus all Israel will be saved. Right? Meaning, the covenant promises of the prophets of Israel stand. Meaning the nation is still the nation. Do you know there's a bunch of Christians who don't believe that modern Israel is not the Israel of the Bible? They don't believe that. And you think, oh, that's just a fringe group. Nope. It's way bigger than that. They see them as just, it's a phony, it's fake. Because of the very thing I'm telling you right now. And that's what they'll be their defense for it. Okay? So, that's not Israel. Yes, it is. So, who's ever heard of that before? Anybody here ever heard that? Okay, so you have heard this. All All right?
So the motivation behind that is to steal all the blessings from the Jews and to be anti-Semitic.
Yes. Well, and then say that they love Israel because they talk the game, but they love it because they are. All right. When me, a descendant of Druid Irish pagan Catholics, says that I'm a Jew, that's a direct assault on the Bible and a direct assault on Israel. You understand? I am not. I was blessed by the covenant of Jacob. I was blessed by the Messiah sending the gospel into the world, and I've received salvation as a wild olive branch being brought in to the nourishing sap of the cultivated olive root. I'm quoting Romans, I believe that's 10. All right? Does everybody get that? Now, I know that I'm being very theological here, but you got to get this. Because at some point in your life, you're going to hear this challenged. And I want you to be firm on it. Now, understand why. Is there a lot of Christians that don't know any of this and wouldn't know the difference? Of course there is. But you're in a Bible school, so that you're not one of them, right?
Amen.
Okay. But it's an important lesson, and I want you to see that. All right. So Hezekiah. Now Hezekiah was, a hero. Hezekiah was a young man. He was the son of Ahaz, who we know how bad he was, right? And Assyria is coming, has just as exiled Israel. And the Lord blesses Judah and gives them a young Hezekiah. And without a young Hezekiah, they would have been exiled as well. Because Hezekiah stands against idolatry and witchcraft, starts destroying all the paganism and witchcraft of his father, Ahaz, and turns to the God of Israel, and goes, and then the king of Assyria comes up, and at this point, what Assyria is offering Israel is offering Judah here is a great deal. The most powerful army, see at this point Assyria isn't actually fighting wars anymore. Now they're just coming and say, surrender, or, it's a joke.
We're going to walk over you.
Yeah. So, so they come in, they don't want to fight because they'll lose a couple soldiers. They'd rather just you surrender and make it easier on everybody. Which is the smart play. Without the miraculous is the absolute logical thing to do, isn't it? You keep your lives, you all get moved to a different place and become part of the king of Assyria, but you live? Yeah, you would all take that deal. It's a pretty good deal. He's even telling them, look at all of these horses. If you put men on them, they're yours. That's a great deal. That's why people are caving even quicker now, because they've already proved their military strength, and now their army has quadrupled because all those men have become part of their army. You understand? So, the offer that's being given here is a pretty good one. So he comes, and of course we have Sennacherib. All right, he comes, and you see that some time has passed now from Judah, because it was Tiglath-Pileser and now it's Sennacherib. He comes and he starts speaking to the people, but then his messenger is crafty, and he starts speaking out to the people on the wall. Yeah, now they've already come through the land of Judah up until Jerusalem, but Jerusalem is a heavily fortified city, and it is the capital, right? And of course, Jerusalem is up a mountain, so it's very hard to attack, because it's walled in, and there's mountains everywhere, and you can't sneak up on them because they can see you from everywhere. And it's a difficult play. It's a great military strength. All right, Jerusalem is. So they're outside the wall, but the city's walled in. Hezekiah has taken tons of people in the city that were of Judah that have fled, and remnants of those from Israel who have come to him as well. All right? And he's at the wall, and what he does something sneaky. He starts yelling out to them, come on, don't, surrender to the king of Assyria who has stood in our way, and blah, blah, blah. But he's doing something interesting. He's speaking in Hebrew. And you see the guys that are negotiating with him, they're saying, please speak in Aramaic. We understand it. Don't speak in Hebrew so that everyone can hear you. But he purposely keeps speaking in Hebrew. Now, Hebrew was not a common language. Hebrew was only spoken by the children of Israel. That's it. Israel and Judah. No one else spoke Hebrew. Aramaic was still the common language at this point because of the dominance of Assyria. Right? So, but yet he's speaking in Hebrew to all the men. And then he's saying to the men on the wall, don't listen to them. Do you want to live? Right? Who has stood in the king of Assyria's way? And he starts mentioning the gods of Sepharvaim and of Arpad and all this stuff. Saying, where are the gods of them? All these peoples. Who could stand in the face of the king of Assyria? And then he says the most audacious thing. He says, well, don't you know? It was the God of Israel that sent us here. And at this point, see, if Hezekiah, what Hezekiah did here is extreme faith, credited to him as righteousness, as what Abraham did. The logical, smart, humanitarian thing, every word you can think of for him to do right now is to lay down their weapons, save all these people's lives, and go with them. Right?
Yeah.
But Hezekiah doesn't hear it. You know what he does? He tears his robes, which is their way of the king, humbling himself. Right? And he goes and lays before the prophet Isaiah in Jerusalem. Humbling himself before the Lord. That's what that picture is. And he says, Isaiah, seek the Lord. Maybe he will rescue us and deliver us. Hezekiah believed that the Lord could deliver him. Now this is insurmountable odds. Think of all the odds they've had before and then times it by 1,000,000. Right? That's the odds that they're facing right now. And yet there even being a chance, like a lot of times it's fight or die. Here it's surrender and live. It's on the table. That's the easy one to take. But he says to pray to the Lord, perhaps the Lord will defend us, the Lord can deliver us from the hand of Assyria. And Isaiah hears from God and the Lord speaks to Isaiah. And Isaiah tells him that they will not come in the city. They will never make it inside the city. That's a pretty incredible statement, right? They will not throw a spear or shoot a bow in the city. They will wait out, and then because they have defied me. And see, what it is, in the prophecy Isaiah gives, I love, because it's the Lord speaks to him in a personal way, like the Lord is offended. How dare they say things like that? It's like they took him on. They provoked him. It wasn't even about Judah right now. It was about they provoked him. You know what I mean? Yeah. To say things like that. So, this is what the Lord is speaking directly to. Okay, if they're going to talk like that, then this is going to be the way it is. And he says to him, and I will send him back, the king back, and he will be killed. I mean, so he doesn't even say that, but the king is going to go back. Somehow, the Lord is going to force him home, and as soon as he's home, he's going to be killed. The most powerful king on the earth. Okay? But you understand, Hezekiah hears this word and has to do it. He has to stand with all of these people facing annihilation. And not just annihilation, because they would torture you and make it hurt for you standing against them in a way that you can't imagine. Right? So, he stands. And he goes out again, and they come, and then they say it again, what? And they gives him one more chance. Don't listen to Hezekiah when he says, the Lord will deliver you. Where was the Lord all these other times? And where was the Lord when Israel was, right? He's saying all this, and of course the men stand with Hezekiah. What's interesting here is that they don't turn on him themselves. Because enough of them could just say, what is he doing? Let's just surrender. Right? But they don't. They stand and trust Hezekiah heard from God and that Isaiah's prophecy will happen. Which is an incredible thing. There's 185,000 men outside the city right now. Alright? And so, the Lord takes care of it in, a pretty simple way. You remember how I told you sometimes the Lord makes you go out and fight and sometimes he just handles it? Well, this time he just handles it.
Nice.
Alright? So, Hezekiah trusts the Lord, believes the word, stands, and an angel goes out and slays 185,000 men in one swoop, one night. And they wake up in the morning and there's the bodies. Can you imagine looking over the wall of Jerusalem and seeing the sight?
That's a little bit of cleanup work.
Yeah. And they had to stack the bodies for months probably and burning them. I mean, the smell. Whew.
It's a really good smell too.
Yeah, I have never smelled that smell. I don't think I ever want to. All right? But that's the sight. And of course, the king of Assyria, Isaiah says he'll get a report, and of course, he melts with fear with this and goes back. I won't mess with them again, right? And then he's killed by his own sons right when he gets home. So it's an incredible story. The Lord, Hezekiah stood, and the Lord delivered them from Assyria. And at this point, Assyria starts to weaken. They don't lose their power; they maintain it for a couple generations. But then Babylon starts to rise up, and sees this is the point where Assyria starts to come down, and Babylon starts to rise. It doesn't happen over, it happens over a period of like 100 years, right? But that's the shift starts now. And of course, why? Because Assyria looks vulnerable now, right? And so, anyway, the Lord, incredible deliverance, and Isaiah, son of Amoz, by the word of Isaiah, and so then time goes, and of course Hezekiah serves the Lord in such an incredible way. He takes down the high places, destroys them all, brings all worship back to the priests in the temple. He goes full force. He was like David, where he was a musician and singer and songwriter, and there's an incredible guy. Sends out. Like I said, he also took in as many of the children of Israel from the you could say refugees of Israel that he could. Right? And brought them all back to the Lord. He sends out priests to teach the Torah. And I mean, incredible stuff that he did. And he really turns Judah back to the Lord. All right? But then at the end of his life, I warned you, I got to take some coffee just because I hate the next part I have to say. He becomes so blessed. God blesses him. With blessing comes testing, right? He becomes so blessed. And from that point of incredible weakness where they were about to be annihilated and wiped out to incredible strength, and the Lord continued to bless Judah, and they just prospered, and he became powerful again, and Judah becomes powerful again, and he's got so used to the blessing and favor of God that one day, this distant nation, they send some delegations to come and tell him how they heard of him and heard all that has happened, right? And heard about the story and want to see. And of course, they come in peace, but they're spies, is what they are, right? But Hezekiah, because he's so blessed and he's so happy, he just, oh yeah! And he brings them in and he shows them all. Now, this is not like a week later. This is towards the end of his life. Does everybody get that? All right? And he shows them everything, and he gloats about how blessed he is. And of course, at this point, he is, when he had all of the stuff that the kingdom of Judah has amassed. Right? And Isaiah comes to him and says, who were those men? He said, oh, they were delegates from a distant land called Babylon. And they wanted to, thank me, or they heard about me and heard the stories and wanted to see, the kingdom. And then Isaiah says, what did you show them? He says, everything that I have, I showed them. And then Isaiah says, the time will come when everything you own and that you see will be carried off to Babylon. And even the children that come from your own body, your flesh and blood, will be carried off and become eunuchs for the king of Babylon. Ooh, that's a pretty strong prophecy, isn't it? Now, you're going through Isaiah. Does he mention the Babylonian exile in Judah? How far are you into it?
We're not that far.
17.
All right. There's only 66 chapters, so.
Yeah.
Well, he mentions all of that. He goes into the exile, goes into Babylon, then he goes into the regathering, except for it's 100 years before, because he was in the 700s. And they were in exile until the 500s. All right? So this was roughly around now the timetable, since it was 722 when Israel was exiled. This is more like 690, All right? And so roughly 100 years from that point is when Judah is actually exiled from Babylon. All right? But the thing is, Hezekiah gives a terrible answer. And it was recorded in both this and Chronicles and as being displeasing to the Lord, his attitude. He says, okay, the word of the Lord is good. Yes, I receive it. What should he have done? And the Lord did not like his attitude. He should have fallen on his knees and cried out, as King Josiah did. Well, you've read it already, because I already had you read it, even though it's future at this point. Even when he's told he can't turn it around, he tries anyway. Right? So Hezekiah accepts it rather than comes to the Lord with it, which is a terrible thing. Now, I skipped one story I'll go back to as I went to that. And there's one story that's separate from this, but it's an awesome story about Hezekiah. At one point, before that whole thing when he was old, right about the middle of his kingdom, all right? The whole thing of king of Assyria happened when he was still a young king. He was still a young man in his 20s when that happened, all right? Later on, he becomes very ill. And the Lord sends Isaiah into him and says, get your house in order, get everything set, because you're not going to recover. Mm-hmm. Get your heir settled, who's going to take your place, and what's all going to happen. And Hezekiah, see, at this point, he's different than the old version. What does he do? He hears the word.
He pleads.
He gets down and he pleads to the Lord, and he says, Lord, how I worshipped you and how I want to live so I can continue to serve you and have Judah praise you, right? The Lord is so blessed by his response that while Isaiah is walking out of the palace, he tells Isaiah, go back. Now, I'm going to get to the theological ramifications of this story, and there is some. Okay? So he goes back to Hezekiah, and he says, the Lord says, I've heard your prayer and the way that you've humbled yourself before me, and I will add 15 years to your life. First of all, he already knows now he's going to have 15 years, right? I'll add 15 years to your life, and you will recover. And then the Lord shows him something to do. Of course, the Lord shows them, and they have to take a step of faith and do it, and the healing comes, right? And he prepares this thing, and he has to step out and do what the Lord shows him, and Hezekiah recovers. But he asks him first, what will be the sign that I'll recover? And Hezekiah prays, and the Lord says, do you want the shadow to go forward 10 steps or back? Imagine that. And Hezekiah says, well, it's easy to make it go forward. How about we make it go back? So they watch the shadow. Now, of course, you know science. You understand that means planetary change. Well, the Lord actually is capable of just separating light and just making it do whatever he wants, because he's the Lord, right? But so he takes a shadow and it goes backwards 10 steps. An incredible thing. And of course, Hezekiah, isn't making this all up. He's heard the stories. He's heard Gideon ask the Lord about the what was on the flax and all that. Remember all that? And the Lord honors him. Because his heart, the way he responds, the way he asks, the way he believes, he trusts the Lord honors him because of it. And so he's strengthened and encouraged that he will recover. He must have been really ill, right? And he recovers, and he has 15 more years, and he does incredible things. But right at the end, he gets a little arrogant, and he hears this word. He should have humbled himself before the Lord and tried to, see what he could do and try to plead with the Lord. But he doesn't. He accepts it, okay? Because he says in his mind, you see, the Lord tells us what he said in his heart. Will I not have peace and security in my lifetime? I'm not going to have to see war and see this. That's not bad. Right? So my grandson will have to, but... what's incredible about that story about his sickness and the Lord sending Isaiah back is, first of all, theologically, it's an emotional story. Hezekiah understanding David and understanding the Lord is moved by us, that we can touch him. Right? So there's no other way to explain this story. There's no non-emotional way to explain this story. It's emotional. He understands the Lord is emotional, right? And he humbles himself and cries out to the Lord, and the Lord hears it and feels his heart and is moved by him, Remember, the Lord was even moved by Ahab in the midst of his rebellion when he humbled himself. And the Lord says, to Elijah, look at how Ahab's humbled himself. He's so much more graceful than we are. That's the thing. It's like, you see how people read through the Old Testament and it's all law, and the New Testament is grace. See, that is a twisted assault on the Bible. This is all grace. He continually allows them, calls them back, deals with them with all of their wickedness and all of their stuff, won't let them go, and he's so quick to forgive them and accept them after all the stuff that they do. It's amazing, but he is. That's when he tells us that he is faithful and righteous to forgive us our sins and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. He means it if we confess it, right? And that has always been the way he is. He has not changed.
Right. Amen.
So Hezekiah knows this, and he gets down and he humbles himself and he prays, and the Lord hears him, and he sends Isaiah back. Imagine Isaiah be like, oh, okay, I go back and now. Well, so it also said the Lord can be moved by emotion. The Lord feels. Now, I've said this stuff to you before, but I'm proving it to you that there's many examples of this. Right? He felt Isaiah's heart. He was blessed and moved by it, and then acted and changed the situation because he was. Meaning when we pray, can move God. When we turn towards him. That's why the prayers of the righteous accomplish much. Why? Because we can cry out to the Lord and he hears us. You understand? That is the point. And it's the awesome point of this story. So anyway, so I already went to the end of Hezekiah when he said that thing to Isaiah, and that was very distasteful. That is also recorded in Isaiah. What's interesting is you're going through this time, and we're going through Chronicles, and there's more about Hezekiah even in Chronicles. But in Isaiah, Hezekiah is there. As you go on, there's chapter after all this history is recorded again. And this whole story with Assyria is all recorded in Isaiah too. And you're going to read through it then. All right? And though the prophecies that he says are there in Isaiah, Isaiah is not chronological. It's an accumulation and you could say a conglomeration of all the different prophecies in the career of Isaiah. Right? All right. So, that brings us to chapter 21. So, he's told that word. It ends with Hezekiah, and he's old, and he dies, and his son Manasseh takes over. Manasseh was 12 years old when he became king, and he reigned 55 years in Jerusalem, and his mother's name was Hephzibah. Say it fast. So, Hephzibah. Who noticed the 55-year thing?
Yeah.
Anybody?
That means you did good, right?
No.
Well, it's actually a very interesting story that you don't get here. You have to read the Chronicles account because there's an entirely huge part of the story that is missing. The second part of the story. We get the first part here. The reason why it's 55 years. You think he's the most wicked king they ever had, and he lived 55 years longer than any other king?
Yeah, this doesn't add up.
Because he had two different times. He had two terms. All right? I'm going to fill it in. So then when we go through Chronicles, we're going to fly through it because I've filled in a lot of the stuff. All right? I'm not going to take my time as detailed when we go through Chronicles. I'm just going to mention a couple of basics. I'm going to point out to you the theological things about them coming back. And I'm going to point those out, and we're going to fly through it. Well, here's what happens. First of all, after Hezekiah, Manasseh takes over when he's 12 years old. Okay? And remember how many I told you the sad story and always how difficult it is for the next generation to grow and to continue on? And that is the lesson. Right? Well, of course, Hezekiah changed a little bit when he was old. He was only 12. See? And so Manasseh just goes crazy. Grows up and goes full-blown on for idolatry, witchcraft, witchcraft to the point of sacrificing his children and setting up a Baal altar in the middle of Jerusalem, and the hands of the statues. And what happened is there's this huge a statue of Baal and his arms out. And there was a huge furnace underneath, and they would get it super hot, and you would lay your child on the hands. Witchcraft is good though, right? It can be white witches.
Okay, put
See?
teenagers on that?
Could you put teenagers on? So, this is what he does. And he, and of course, when you read Jeremiah and you read, you know, the Lord is there's nothing that quite pushes him to the limit other than sacrificing your children. To him, it's just, and he says, in Ezekiel 16, the Lord is speaking to Judah, and he says, "You slaughter my children." And the Lord is proclaiming in anger how they slaughter his kids. They're his. So, anyway, this is, and of course, then Manasseh fills Jerusalem with innocent blood. Imagine what that looked like. Remember how the Lord feels about innocent blood? Fills Jerusalem with innocent blood. And of course, it says at this point, Manasseh has pushed the limit so far that it absolutely cannot be turned around. All right? And it says, verse 9, but they did not listen. Manasseh seduced them to do evil more. This is the key verse. Circle it, underline it. More than the nations whom the Lord destroyed before the sons of Israel. And of course, look at this. But they did not listen, and Manasseh seduced them. Manasseh drove them to do evil. Oh, sad. But what does that mean? More. Well, the point here is that the Lord would not be just if he allowed them to stay. At this point, they've crossed a line that cannot go back. The Lord removed the nations of Canaan because of this. And Manasseh has now done more wickedly, therefore, the Lord, because of his love, has to step in here. Because he is love, which means he is justice, and it would not be just to the nations of Canaan if they were allowed to stay. You understand? Does everybody get that? That's why when you read Josiah and all that he does, you're brokenhearted that he can't stop it. He can't. And why? Because of what Manasseh, son of Hezekiah, did in Jerusalem. It cannot be stopped. Right? And that's what Huldah tells him when he goes to her. Okay. So, anyway, Manasseh did. Now, the second part of the story, I'm going to give you I know we're 1 minute past, but I never do this, but you got to give me one more minute. I'm going to give you the super quick version. Okay? Well, because you're going to go through it in Chronicles too. What happens is, Hezekiah is dragged away in hooks. Eventually, I think it's the Babylonians. Yeah, the Babylonians come at some point, and they, or it might be Assyria. I should know this, but I'm scared. I think it's Babylonia.
Yeah, go back to 12.
They get in and they attack Israel and lay siege to it at the first time when now they're going to start exercising control over Israel for a couple generations. And they take Manasseh and they drag him to Babylon with hooks in his skin. That's one of the things they did. And they put him in a cage with hooks. He was a caged animal in Babylon. He cries out to the Lord in tears and humbles himself before the Lord in a cage. He so humbles himself that the Lord turns the heart of the king of Babylon around to send Manasseh back to Jerusalem and proclaim him king over Judah again. The most wicked king they ever had, ever, cries out to the Lord, and he listens, and he gives him another chance. Is that grace? He says, so why he reigned 55 years is because he got a second time, and he came back and he undid a lot of the stuff he did. Most of it.
Kind of like Nebuchadnezzar.
And then his son takes over and goes back into all the stuff. Great story. Anyway, but you don't get that here. You get that whole detail in Chronicles. And of course, I think in the Apocrypha, there's the prayer of Manasseh. believe. Okay? So Manasseh is like the picture. I think he is now. I did a message on this like 3 years ago. Was anybody here for that? Brandon, you were the only one? You were here at some point. Yeah, you were here, but anyway. How I think that the ultimate picture of redemption, for some reason no one ever preaches from this story. But if you would talk about a story of mercy and grace and forgiveness and redemption, I don't know if there's a better one. Anyway, we'll stop there because you're going to read through this when you go through Chronicles. But that's why he reigned 55 years. All right, I had you already start Chronicles. I want you to read to, because you see how we're going to finish this in like 2 minutes. So go to, what did I have you read to, 10? Which was all genealogy, and it starts pretty much at 10. So read to 25. The reason why I'm having you read that much is that we are not going to be that detailed, because you've read a lot of it. I'm only going to point out the differences. That's all I'm going to do. All right? Okay, have a wonderful night. God bless.